I've been coaching women all over the world.
Yeah.
Literally, on every continent, and very different cultures, like in Africa, South Africa, India, China, in the US, in South America, and all over Europe. Like Simone de Beauvoir, I love her work where she says, "You're not born a woman, you become one." And this, I think, is incredibly interesting. We are architects of our own experience, so everything we know about ourselves, our self-image, our ego, everything is just a mental construct. And also, other research is showing that we have been taught men are from Mars and women from Venus. That's not true.
No.
The truth is that we are much more alike than we're different.
Exactly.
But we have been taught this narrative, which we have made part of our own history. So we think we are so different, which makes this divert between us, which is absolutely not necessary, which is creating a lot of conflict. So I've been on like 10 years of very intensive psychological, spiritual training. We talked about that last time, be a spiritual beings having a human experience, to understand the deep psyche. The logic of our psyche, which is who we really are. Yes, we talked about it in last time about the patriarchy. It's a difficult issue to talk about because I don't recognize it. And we are living according to our whole society. It's based on that. And like we said last time, I'm not here to criticize men. I'm not here to criticize anybody. But there's such a huge potential. It's when we in society come to this place where it doesn't matter if you're a man or a woman. Because we talked about it the last time too. How do we identify ourselves? Biologically or psychologically? And we come to this time where it really doesn't matter. And that's where, in my mind, if we want to create a better world and it doesn't look so good, I think this is the next step of human evolution to that, like a transformation to the higher level of consciousness, where we can access that potential and create that kind of a world that everybody intrinsically know. This is what you want.
Yeah.
But of course, we have to break through so many glass ceilings. And those glass ceilings, as we know, it's also for women. They really don't understand because they're just living in this world of the patriarchal organization of society. They think it's just like this is how it's supposed to be. If you look at like the 5-6 largest organizations in the world, led by men, we seem to follow the ideas of these great men. And I like to think of Elon Musk, like he wants to spend trillions of dollars to go and raise a civilization on Mars. And this is what we talked about the last time. This is playing God. And if you want to play God, you will be punished, in my opinion. If you spend those trillions of dollars, it's saving our planet. This is our home. This is as far as we know the only planet in this entire cosmos which has intelligent life. It is just way of thinking and the costs to get there and what it will imply. Is that the definition of a genius? I don't think so.
No.
As humankind, we are raising to a new level of consciousness, and this is already happening.
And I think it's a bit of a danger to think of wealth as the only reason for intelligence. Like he has the wealth on the background to say, I got rich, so of course I'm smart. But it doesn't always have to be like that in an efficient way. It's working automatically today. So whether he got wealthy because he was inherited the wealth or whether he just got lucky, it's not enough foundation to say, this is the smartest guy on earth going to save civilization. Because I also agree with you. This is totally playing God. And it's like, okay, if he goes to Mars, be welcome, but I don't think he'll come back to Earth. Like saying if he would spend the money here, we would already save Earth. Because that means that if we can save Mars, we could also save Earth, of course. It's like this, what Neil deGrasse Tyson said, is that if we can terraform Mars, you could also re-terraform Earth.
Exactly.
And how can he then say giving up Earth? That's what comes to my mind. This is all about money.
If you look at it from a global perspective, that we are living on this planet, all the borders between all the countries and all the different languages, what we are seeing in many parts of the world, like particularly in the States now, the decline of democracy, which happens when the world is in an uneasy state. We're facing a lot of problems. At some point, it will even itself out, but this is a law of the systemic thinking. The pendulum is now going in one direction, and it will turn. And if Donald Trump is elected, the superpower, United States of America, is not a superpower anymore. And it will not be. And I see it as a huge opportunity for Europe to show the world we can do it differently.
I'm thinking also Scandinavia, not because we are small, but because we actually went through a social democracy to get to the state we are today. It's not to say we are perfect, because we are absolutely not. We have things to develop as well. But we are ahead of America in a lot of sense. They could look up to us in a lot of their politics. They're not even there of the socialism we've been through.
Yes.
And they call it communism, but that's not Scandinavia, because we're not that. So they don't even see the difference between socialism and communism. But we have a global problem. We have a global problem of ecological crisis, of climate crisis. And then it's just about, again, this is politics. And then they talk about politics. What's an excuse, you know?
It's all about shareholder value, and it has always been shareholder value. The fact is that shareholder value has two sides of it. The one is the short term. I want my money back as soon as possible and as much as possible. And on the other side, the one who earns most money are the ones who invest long term. These are the best investors. It just signifies that the men are the ones who are the greedy ones, wants to fulfill their ego needs. Well, look at me. This is a very basic, simple psychological model, which is called the 7 level of consciousness, where the first 30 years of our life, we are about to fulfill our ego needs. And then come the midlife crisis, and everybody says, wow, my wife doesn't understand me, and 50% people get divorced because living the desires of our ego is not fulfilling anymore. I call it desires and ends of the soul, which is connecting us to the female, which is connecting us to the common good. All these female traits, which is compassion, which is empathy, which is walking the extra mile, which is creating a safe environment mentally and emotionally. Stereotypically, they are female. But the organizations of today are not democratic. They are very command and control, detail-oriented, micromanaged. And it's a kind of a paradox that modern organizations are organized according to this when we're living in a democracy. So to try to sum up, because I've been thinking about this lately, when we talk about diversity, when we talk about inclusion, it kind of divides. Because diversity is like, okay, so those are the people that are different from us, and then we have to include them into organizational culture.
The inner patriarch you're talking about, if women get the same position as a man in a big business led by or made by men to start with, doesn't have to necessarily mean it getting more female, just mean that they can show to the world we are celebrating diversity because we got some people in to do our job, which we're telling them what to do. Like you said, micromanaging. I've been also micromanaged, but I'm not so easy because I get very troublesome when they try to do that.
I hope we can say that there's some hope in the future to go towards a new era where we try to solve problems on the global scale, which is what Yuval Harari is saying. This is an opportunity to globally connect and look at it from that perspective. We need to solve these problems together. And I think the best way of doing that is creating this kind of organizational culture which is supporting that. If you do that, you will earn at least 15% more money. You will be more attractive as an employer. You will be more innovative. And the right way is that the top management has to be fully supportive of the whole program, because it will be a long-term strategical organizational transformation. Everybody talks about change today, and so what does this change mean? It means that, okay, we do the same thing, but we do it in a different way. Nothing happens. I also know from a study done by Stephen Covey, the most famous coach, a beautiful person. He did a large study on the top 500 Fortune organizations in the world. And the results came out, how good are you at executing company strategies? And the result was those 500 top in the world are only utilizing at an average 20% of the potential. And why is that? Because we are not working together. The basic part of human nature, which is compassion, empathy, we're doing this together. We create a safe environment. And if you do that, you can, the sky is no limit. And it's not rocket science. And if you think about it, logically, to thrive in an organization, we need those part of our human nature to be fulfilled. We need to be seen. We need to feel that we are contributing to something that is for the greater good. Because we also need to take care of our egos. And we can do that. But we are so hung up in the old way of thinking
Yes, about Elon Musk was his childhood. That when you don't get enough attention, maybe care, or maybe even recognition as a 1 to 7 year old, is also a way of going back to that stage of competing and getting the elbows out because you didn't learn anything else when you were that little. So you're saying that psychology is following us all the way through these companies.
Absolutely. Everybody has narcissistic supplies to fulfill. We need to feel secure money-wise, health-wise. We need to feel secure in our relationships. We need to feel secure because that we're doing something which is meaningful for others. Mm-hmm. And these are ego needs that we need to fill up, which is what we call the narcissistic supplies. But very often, those supplies are not fulfilled. And that's what we learn when we are kids. We don't feel loved, we don't feel seen, we don't feel appreciated. And those incredibly painful experiences are being stored in our whole system, particularly in the part of our brain which we call amygdala, which is the one to take care of the emotions. And as kids, when we experience tantrums, the amygdala just collapses. And these feelings, those emotions remains in our bodies. So when we've grown up and we experience something that is the same as we experienced as a child, we become that little wounded child and we start acting like one. This is what Donald Trump is doing. He's acting like a little child. Erdogan is doing it. And a lot of politicians are doing it. So to free ourselves to go out of the comfort zone, we need to start to understand that we are actually just a mental construct. And this is something that we don't learn in the school. We don't learn it anywhere. We never learn what does it mean to be a human being from society. Okay, you go to kindergarten, you go to school, you go to university, you get a job. You get a partner, you get a house, you get a car, you get a dog, like we said, Volvo, Villa, Vovov. And when you do that, and then you find out, was that it? No, it's much more to me.
Yeah.
Going back to Harari, and also my studies in social anthropology and sociology, where they say that people that were living in the Stone Age culture, before we become steadfast in those tribes, because they were living in tribes, and the tribe couldn't be more than 150. If they were more than 150, they would have to divide, because then they could not connect to each of one of the tribes. In many of those tribes, we know that from studies today, they didn't have a word for I.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
So when you talk about individual needs in these tribes, they don't understand.
No, exactly.
But our tribe will die. Survival is we.
Yeah, and we have shifted totally into that. In order to survive, you have to be the most successful individual, so that you have to push other people down to get there. Yeah, it's totally different worlds. It's the same when I'm half indigenous, so I'm half Sami. So I know a little bit about the nature that you grew up with. And then I think that being in nature creates more this, you have to rely on others to survive, because otherwise you might be killed by a snake or a bear or whatever. You have to defend yourself. And being together creates this safety that is more like our home we have to protect, right?
Yeah, because that's who we are, which is very true. And that's where the potential lies for us to grow and empower ourselves. That we can go to work and say, I love my colleagues. I love to go to work because we're doing something great. We are contributing to something that is better for the world. Everybody wants that, but you're not allowed to do it in this competitive environment in work. But the paradox is that if you allow people to thrive and do all these things, you will earn much more money than the others.
The summary is that we constructed money as a substitute for our psychological needs.
Well, it wasn't like that. If you go back 2,000 years ago, you had to lend money to invest in cargoes and buildings. But in those days, they didn't charge rents.
Yeah.
And every 100 years, all the debts were nilled. 90% of the people were farmers, and they were living in small communities, which, by the way, in sociology, we call it Gesellschaft und Gemeinschaft. Gesellschaft means you're living in a city, and everybody doesn't really know each other. And the Gesellschaft is like the community. We're in this together. The shift from everybody being farmers, moving to the cities, created a huge paradigm shift. And that's when people really started to get rich. I mean, there were a lot of rich people before that, but then they started to colonize. It was only based on the male ego.
We are in a post-capitalistic world where we're trying to enhance the capitalism into a new light, because the gap will only grow because the gap we already had, and now they're not getting enough from what we have now. So now we're going into space, and now we're going into an artificial world, and that's a new light again.
I think we're at this stage now where we have a choice. We have to rethink the economy because basically it's enough for everybody.
They know it. The resources are going out, so that's what they're trying to find resources other places, because resources are now keeping them the only safety net. Can we say that artificial intelligence is kind of the new business as usual then, right?
The change, the transformation that will happen in the climate, in the resources. I mean, we are ruining the oceans, we are ruining agriculture, we're ruining everything.
Yes.
So, I mean, it's just a question of time before we can't do it anymore. And I think that limit is already overridden. I would say, fire all the old guys. The things are happening so fast, the transformation is happening so fast. You know, like 2 years ago, we would talk about artificial intelligence the way that we do today. Dalai Lama, he says, the world will be saved by Western women.
The Western women has to realize their power first, though.
Well, they have it, but they don't have access to it in larger context.
I feel that a lot of us sleeping in this comfort zone, that they are led by men, and they feel that's very comforting.
Yeah, because they're really not aware of what's happening to them living in that bubble. Because I know with my coaching, when I talk about the patriarchy and when I talk about this in the critic that everybody has, is in the patriarchy, this internalized voice that tell women that because you're a woman, you have to behave in a certain way to be loved, to be accepted, which means that you are missing so much of your potential. And these are the facts. And we talked about the difference of the brain. We talked about the cultural impact. We talked about neuroscience. We don't have to discuss that anymore.
No, exactly.
It is this, but the realization of how deep embedded that is in us, we need to work with it. We need to make people aware of that you have this internalized voice, which is judging you, criticizing you. You're not good enough. You don't look, you're fat. You don't have the right clothes. Your hair looks awful, and your makeup, and all of these things, which is just something that is created for the woman to look great for other men.
Yes, I feel a bit sorry because a lot of women, they feel that this is the way to freedom, because then they will be seen again. But it's kind of like putting out there so that women don't get the opportunity to thrive. Because it's like if, like you said, if we coach more women into this state to be more confident, they would see that these needs are not there. It's only artificial needs that it doesn't free them. And they know that subconsciously, but I feel it's a little bit like put there on purpose so that women cannot enter society into the power that they are capable of. There are so many industries directed at women to keep them in the state of, this very superficial state.
And who put them there in the first place? I mean, who created those businesses? They were men. I am Norwegian, but I live in Germany, and I lived here for the last almost 15 years. And of course, really women from all over the world. And there was a young Chinese student came to me. She was working on her PhD here in Germany as a university. And she said, I can't take this anymore. I can't deal with the German culture. I said, okay. And she told me a story about growing up as a girl in China, where you are actually regarded as nothing because they want boys. She grew up in a tiny village in the middle of nowhere. And the teacher said to her, you are nothing. Nothing will become of you. It would be better if you were dead. And she was working really, really. This is what a lot of women are being told every day in all the world. Let's be honest. Let's be real. So this is her self-image. And when she came to me, she didn't just look me in the eyes, and she was just talking like this. The inner patriarch with the inner voice, which is criticizing you, which we know is just a construct because you're not born with it. So her realizing that she has a voice inside her, which is a construct which she learned from school, which is not her. Long story short, she ended up leading the whole department in that university.
Wow, it works.
I have several stories like that, women from Saudi Arabia. And when in the first meeting, she was, with her hijab. But after a couple of sessions, she met with me smiling because she just realized she was living in this mental construct of other people running her life. What would happen in this world if every woman in this world understood this and were liberating themselves from living under the social construct of the patriarchal organization of society. What will happen?
I will think it will be a revolution.
It
And
will
I
be.
think that they don't realize it's still modern slavery, because this is slavery. It's just in a different form.
Yeah.
Even we talk about different cultures, and it's of course different religions behind a law, but religion doesn't have to be used as an explanation for getting equality. Because I think that if we talk about religion in a respectful way, because I want everyone to believe in whatever they want to believe in, and I want all religions to have their free space, the way to preserve them is to get more equality. Because otherwise we don't get the equity of the religions, and the wealth, again, is not going to be distributed fairly.
Yeah.
So everyone needs equality.
I think if I should summarize, for that to happen, everybody has to have the feeling that we are really all equal and that we have the same opportunities and the same rights and everybody should be treated equal. This is not what's happening in today's business. And it should happen, which I would call self-organizational democratic organizations. The studies being done on that, and so if you do that, you will have a noble purpose in the world. You will actually contribute to creating a better world. The business will earn much more money. How can you spend that money in a way that serves your purpose? This, I think, will be the paradigm shift. The potential in doing this, they would jump on it. Most people are not aware of it. Some people are aware of it, but why don't they do it? Well, because then I have to lose my position. I won't be the CEO anymore.
And a little bit the boy club problem, because losing position against the women, but against other men. Because then it's like another billionaire comes ahead of me, and then they have the competition problem again. We have the Cold War, not only in physical sense with military, but also in industries. The Cold War in the industry is also about the landscape where they have the power above societies, above military, above the industrial revolution has gone in a hamster wheel, totally out of control here. Patriarchal, but it's also, they don't realize that they are leaders. They are so much about competing against the other billionaires that this is the only thing that matters, that they have to be the best and the fittest.
We talked about how we identify ourselves as human beings, biologically, psychologically, but there's also something called social identity. Where do you belong in hierarchy? So for these guys, they need to be on the top on this pyramid. They are, Zuckerberg or Musk or Bezos. There's another amazing coach. His name is Marshall Goldsmith. It's the one who everybody calls them when they have problems. And he's just amazing. I mean, he's older than me and he's a Buddhist, and I understand why he's so great, because he talks only about human behavior. The purpose is not only earning money, the purpose is also to do something good with the money.
Yes, and I think about the resources again that they always fear to lose, is that if they have the mindset that you're saying, this is also preserving the real wealth, which is resources that we are lacking because of we are destructing it. But if we understand that this is the way to preserve it, this is the way to keep it, that is the real wealth. The real wealth is, like you said, in the human sense, it's gonna be the longest lasting.
We can choose.
We have grown up in an environment where we have something called user interface, is that we were brought up where we could decide ourselves how our life was going to be. So we were brought up that we could use applications, or we could use things online and also in the real world to grow as a person. But it's shifted over now that we have to feed the biggest person, which is again a kind of step back. We have the image that we could thrive as persons. When I grew up in the 90s, it was the internet and everything, and we could scale up. So we got this called user interface, where we were using apps for our own development. Now, with artificial intelligence, for instance, we have to feed the machine to keep the machine going, to give us the answers and how to develop. So we're not feeding ourselves.
We're giving up our autonomy. We're giving up our freedom. And autonomy and authenticity we are hardwired for it. And when we lose that autonomy, when we lose the freedom to be able to have the impact on our own lives, which is happening all over the world. And I think that this is the moment where people get so frustrated and have a lot of passive aggressiveness, a lot of irritation. That's why we can see the violence is increasing, violent behavior in so many countries, because we're just losing the sense of being a human being, which is important.
And integrity. Like we don't have anything to say anymore. Everything we do right now is to feed the system. And that's what you're saying also, that we don't have this embodied, we don't have a sense of self in the whole system. And that makes us also just very vulnerable, because they can easily just use that. We are so weak as persons now that we can easily be marionetted, let's say.
Yeah.
And I don't think there's like evil forces. I don't have the conspiracies. But what I think is unconscious about this is we don't see the dangers that we are heading to when we don't have the self-integrity.
We're kind of asleep in a state of accepting the situation as it is without really knowing it. The point where we realize, when we open our eyes, that we do have a choice to break out of the conformity, the way that we always have done things, the wife, the kids, the house, the job, the mortgage and everything. It's hard to break out.
That we are in the sleeping state, and we have to realize everything we do is a choice, and everything is a political choice, but also everything is an emotional. So when we do something, we are making some bigger choices.
It's interesting when I'm looking at the screen of us, the background is like we're out in space and all the planets are running around.
Yeah.
So like I said, I studied quantum physics, I studied relativity theory. A lot of people would think about it as being spiritual, but the fact is that we are really stardust. Every part of us, all our atoms, all our quantum particles, they were present when the universe started. Everything with us is connected to this conscious universe. And this is not spiritual. These are scientific facts, if you want to believe in science. Mm-hmm. And I do. Yes. And I think about this potential, if you really could connect to that. And I think that is what everybody's missing. Yes, we are missing the connection to the bigger part of ourselves, which is connecting to the whole. This is spiritual, yeah, well, fine, but it's also scientific.
Right, yeah.
Because most people, they need a rational way of understanding it first, because they can go there. But we are really in this together.
Yes, totally with you there. But I think that to get other people's with us on that thought, we also have to mind people that this is not for some alternative spiritualism. This is actually a made alternative by somebody who tried to divide us from the reality that we are. Because we were originally together, like you said, and we are a part of the universe. We're not separated. The earth is not flat, we are a round circle that goes around a sun, and in a big universe. We've been taught by history that all the divisions made also universe divided. It's like you said, men and women, mother and child, and nature and humans. Everything has been divided, how society works. Of course, why shouldn't we also divide Earth and universe? Because we divided everything else.
The monocentric worldview.
That's how the model framed us to think, yeah.
So I'm thinking a lot about consciousness. What is consciousness? And Carl Gustav Jung talks about the collective unconscious, but there's a collective consciousness. Mm-hmm. So I think everything that we're doing right now has something to do with how we create that collective consciousness, where people I have some ideas of it. They will connect to this, which we can compare to the cloud. We use it today, and where the cloud is out there somewhere, and we can connect to that with our ways of thinking, of being. But when people have these ideas, thoughts, they're questioning themselves, they download it from the cloud. And there's a guy called Otto Scharmer. He created what is called the theory U, and it's called pre-sensing. You are present, and you're sensing, and you're downloading what is going to happen from the emerging future. And he's a professor at MIT. So we're not talking bullshit here. We're talking quantum physics. The double split experience is dependent on the observer.
And I think it's interesting, the meta image you present there, because we have an artificial cloud that we are downloading from and we try to find the answers from. And that's kind of like, if you picture that to our minds, our old ancient times, perhaps we had a cloud that was more real at that time. That it maybe, because I think that a lot of traits in humanity, that's my theory though, that we are acting subconsciously from an earlier, more consciousness. So we don't know exactly what we're doing right now because we're missing something. Mm-hmm. And that we used to have. And maybe we're creating those artificial devices and everything just to re-experience original wisdom we once had
But it's still there. I went to a retreat in Italy because he wanted to create a new narrative about humankind, and there was a professor there. And he talked about this. He said the oldest people in the world are the newborn children because they have the connection to the beginning of the universe. And he used the image as a snake biting itself in the tail. And he just opened this perspective for me that if we allow ourselves to listen to the innermost part of ourselves, the voice and the sound of our soul, the answers, they are there. People listen to this, you might think we're talking gibberish, but this is a scientific fact. And if you believe in science, if you believe in quantum physics, if you believe that we are living on the planet which is going around the sun, if you believe there's a universe, this is what we're talking about. And the more people listen to us, the more you allow yourself to feel it. That's where next stage of empowering yourself to the next level of consciousness, experiencing joy, happiness in all aspects of life. And that we have to do. In order to do that, we need to understand these voices that are running our life, holding us back from doing that, which is the mental construct, which is what we call the inner critic, or which Freud called the superego. We're not talking about psychology in the way that Freud was doing. Mark Twain, he said, the two most important days in your life is when you're born, and the second one is when you found out why. If this was like 500 years ago, and we were talking things like this, both you and I, we will have been burned on the fire as witches.
True. I always looked up to the witches because that's what made me the first discovery. It was actually to know about the witches' history. That is when I was 19 years old. I started to think this world has something I don't like. There's something that I can't recognize myself in. And I started to know about the burning of witches. Actually, one of the first steps to my consciousness. I think that we don't realize today is that witching is still happening.
I remember in the 80s, there was a British zoologist, his name is Desmond Morris, and he made a TV program, and he traveled all over the world and did a lot of studies. And one of them, it was that he allowed children to paint on the glass plate, and they filled it from behind. So they did it in a lot of countries all over the world, different cultures. Every culture, they draw the picture of a human being the same way, the round head and the arms like branches and stuff. Everybody does it until they enter the age of 8 or 9 years old. That's where the cultural impact strikes in. Before that, we are all the same. Emotional beings because they're only connected to the limbic system. They're just living their life, experience their emotions. But then, 8 years old, neocortex come in, and then they start to be able to think rational, and then they start to adapt and accommodate to the environment.
So the upbringing is kind of the most important part. If you develop education that can give the safe environment, because otherwise, adulthood we can see today is still a result of that. And we see it today in the structural form in society when it's not on the baby stadium of democracy. All these things is the same thing.
I wrote a book a chapter in the book called How Not to Lose Yourself in a Male Environment.
Yeah.
Which is basically what we have been talking about, how we perceive ourselves as a woman. Diversity always wins. The differentiation of talking about diversity and inclusion might actually be counterproductive, that it creates a conflict instead of talking about equity, which is a very different topic.
Yes.